For the past 7 weeks, we have been discussing the blessings that we have in our toolbox to help us on this journey of life. We talked about our spiritual gifts and our purpose, being present and what our role is as a part of the body of Christ. We talked about speaking our truths and about forgiveness. And this week, as we wrap up our series, we're going to be focusing on God's transformational power. You see, today is what many people refer to as Transfiguration Sunday. On this last Sunday before Lent starts, the lectionary refers to scriptures that talk about the transfigurations of Moses and Jesus. So to break down the scriptures today, and right here I'm going to put in a little personal plug. Anytime you are listening to a sermon or listening to someone preach, pay attention to the order of the scriptures, because typically there's a reason for the order that they're in. There's rhyme and reason to the things we're doing, even though sometimes it might not seem like it. But today, our scriptures were listed in chronological order. So Moses is first. In our Exodus passage, we read about how when Moses spent time talking to God on top of Mount Sinai, his face would transform and shine with all the holy energy he received from God. After going back down the mountain and spending time interacting with the humans on earth, he would veil his face to dull some of that holy luster so that he didn't overwhelm and scare people. Like, you see someone glowing and it's a little freaky. So we're trying to not overwhelm people with all of this glory. And the veil would stay in place until the next time he'd go up to the top of the mountain and he could unveil himself and be with God and spend time there, fully revealed. In our second passage from Luke, we hear the story about how Jesus takes some of his closest confidants up a mountain to talk to God. And when they reach the top, Jesus' robes transformed and flashed like lightning. They encountered the angels of Moses and Elijah, who proceeded to tell them that Jesus' death was near. Then a loud voice said to the disciples, "This is my son, listen to him." After Moses and Elijah departed, Jesus, Peter, John, and James returned down the mountain. The end.
Okay.
It's kind of wild stories, y'all. Like, it's okay to be a little flabbergasted by the audacity that the Bible has sometimes to be this wild. And sometimes when I'm sermon prepping and trying to get all of my thoughts together, I talk to my husband Seth about kind of like what I'm thinking, what I'm processing, or sometimes he just asks, what are we talking about this week? And so this week, that conversation came up and I started telling him about the scriptures and kind of what stories we were working with and where I was going. And I was still kind of getting my thoughts together, trying to figure out what it was that I was going to, how I was going to connect all of my thoughts. And he said, well, stay with me for a second, because this is what I'm thinking. It kind of reminds me of how Optimus Prime was just a semi-rig and driving around, and then all of a sudden he was this like alien robot. It's kind of wild. I was like, we laughed and chuckled together and made jokes or whatever, but the more I percolated on this, the more I was like, this is actually a pretty decent metaphor for what we're talking about here. I can work with that. Optimus was always a robot alien, but he feared that the humans couldn't handle such a concept as a robot alien. So he became something more palatable and more relatable. Humans can comprehend what a semi is, and he was able to protect and watch over everyone as he drove through the roads on planet Earth. Okay, pretty similar to what's going on in our scriptures. Moses knew that the people he was interacting with weren't ready to handle the wonder of God. So he veiled himself to make the covenants more digestible. Basically, what I'm saying is Moses is Optimus Prime. And if Moses is Optimus, then Jesus is Bumblebee.
Oh. Yes.
Yes.
Right? Right? You're with me? Bumblebee takes his friends on a quest, a journey. And along the way, he becomes closer and closer to his band of brothers, at which point he becomes comfortable enough to transform into his alien self. Here we have Jesus journeying with his band of brothers. They journey up the mountain, and he transforms. So you might be asking, why are we talking about transformers? And why is this important? And what do the transfigurations of Moses and Jesus mean to these disciples? And what does it mean to me? Well, let me tell you. The story from Luke is telling an important point from both Jesus' perspective and the disciples' perspectives. From Jesus' perspective, shortly before his death, he was being revealed, like God to Moses on Mount Sinai. And he was continuing the work alongside of Moses and Elijah. The voice from the cloud that the disciples heard, just like on Mount Sinai, said, "This is my son, the chosen one. Listen to him." From the disciples' perspectives, they would have to continue the journey after this point. They're shocked and awed by everything happening on the top of this mountain, and then they have to climb back down. And not only that, but they have to continue the journey to Jerusalem with Jesus. Their stories would have to completely enmesh and merge together with Jesus' story. They must listen to him. And listening to him didn't mean just following him around the tent, camping on top of a mountain. It didn't mean just hanging out in hammocks and chilling in the most beautiful place that they could find, getting a break from the desert. It meant that the disciples must go down the mountain with Jesus and literally follow Jesus as he embraced his suffering and death. The transfiguration of Jesus, of Moses, is best understood as what many scriptural scholars call an apocalyptic vision. Apocalyptic visions are connected to persecution and suffering and death, and gives the visionary character, the main character of the story, a glimpse into their future. This character being Jesus. At the transfiguration, the disciples, just like Moses, are given a vision of who Jesus really is and what he will be in the kingdom in the future. The chosen one. And don't get me wrong, at this point, the disciples definitely knew who Jesus was, right? They're following him around. So clearly they think that he's a pretty important human. But just that, a human. Moses was also a prophet and a human. Elijah was also a prophet and a human. For all they know, Jesus is another prophet. So that is where the transfiguration becomes so important and so much more powerful, because it is that opportunity for God and Jesus and Moses and Elijah to come together and reveal Jesus to the disciples, unveil himself, just like Moses was able to unveil himself with God. This is a whole other level of revelation. Jesus knew it was important that the disciples have firsthand insight into his identity and future, because soon he would be persecuted, not too long down the road. And in the midst of that, in the midst of being thrown, accusations being thrown at him, persecution happening, there's a lot of fear for his friends. Like, watching someone that you love go through that is painful and traumatic. And Jesus knew it would be so important that they could hold on to a first-hand account of what they knew his identity and future destiny would be. Because when we are living in a fear response, when we're living in fight or flight, we need something tangible to ground us and to center us and to hold on to, so that we can get through this life that we're living. When Jesus journeys down the mountain, he's embracing his fate. He's embracing human life in its totality. We experience suffering and questions and joy and love and challenges and crises and persecution, and the list goes on. And when this happens, the disciples must stay grounded and remember that future glory awaits him and them. They must remember Moses and Elijah and the voice that said, "This is my beloved son," and cling to that knowledge, because life is so stinking complex and complicated. Just like Jesus, we can't run away from the life we've been given. But lucky for us, we've been given the gift of knowing the future, of knowing that we are children of a God who loves us. And as we face life like Jesus, we don't run away, but embrace the complexity. Easier said than done. Super easy. No hard questions today. But I want to propose that transfiguration is all around us every day. Just like the disciples, we are constantly witness to the merging of Jesus' story in our own. What if this right here, this community and this space and this time together, is our mountain of transfiguration? Each Sunday, or really any of our time together, Transfiguration Day commences. In community, we bring in burdens and joys, triumphs and defeats of life, and face them with Jesus and each other. In community, we strategize, plan, and discern the ways we hope to mend God's creation together. In community, we identify the needs of our community and the needs of those who live in the world around us as we work together to live into that call to be a beacon of hope and light to those who live in the shadows. In community, we enter into communion, God with us and we with God. And then, with Jesus, we go down the mountain and face life for another week. We do this over and over and over until one day we are transformed into that eternal glory to forever live on the mountain with our Creator. Look around. This right here, this space, these people, your friends, your family, your support system, your community are all the blessings that we have for the journey. So thanks for journeying with me, friends. Now we're going to move